Major gains for the Sudanese army in Khartoum, but fighters with the paramilitary rapid support forces say they're consolidating in Darfur. 2 years of fighting has caused the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Is the conflict in Sudan now at a turning point? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Fighting in Sudan has raged for nearly 2 years, causing what the UN says are the world's worst humanitarian and displacement crises. But this week has seen developments which some analysts believe could be decisive in the conflict and for the country's future. After intense fighting, the army has retaken key positions in the capital from the rapid support forces. The paramilitary group has in turn seized more territory in Darfur in the west, building on what it already controls. There's concern this could lead to Sudan's partition. But for many of its 50 million people, politics is a less immediate concern than survival. See, the conflict has caused famine and disease, forcing millions from their homes. There have been widespread human rights abuses too, including rape. We'll discuss the significance of the last few days with our guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Sudanese soldiers celebrate after retaking the central bank building in Khartoum from the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. It comes a day after they took back the presidential palace from the paramilitary group.
Thank God for allowing our troops to accomplish these victories that were crowned by liberating the palace. With God's will, soon, the sacrifices of these heroic people will bear fruit by seeing Sudan empty and clear from any rebellion.
The army has been making steady gains in the capital since launching a counter-offensive in September. But the RSF still controls large parts of the western region of Darfur. The US accuses the fighters and their allies of committing genocide there. It says they've systematically attacked civilians, targeting particular ethnic groups, and carried out mass rape. Conflict erupted in Sudan in April 2023 after a dispute between the head of the army, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and his former deputy, Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, about how to incorporate the paramilitary group into the armed forces. Since then, the UN says more than 12 million people have been forced from their homes because of the fighting, nearly 9 million within the country's borders, another 3 million crossing into neighbouring countries, including Egypt, Chad and South Sudan. Doctors at this hospital in Khartoum say they're in desperate need of aid.
Since the start of the war, the situation has been catastrophic. Whole communities are facing difficulty getting food, especially in the unsafe areas.
Both sides have said they will fight until the end. Attempts by the US, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain to broker a sustained ceasefire have failed.
The ongoing fighting in Khartoum further underscores the devastating consequences of the conflict for the people of Sudan, and we continue to urge the warring parties to cease hostilities and facilitate the safe, unhindered movement of life-saving humanitarian assistance.
The retaking of the palace and the central bank building is a symbolic victory for the army, but many Sudanese doubt it will bring an end to nearly 2 years of fighting. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring our guests into the show then. From Cairo, we're joined by Dallia Abdelmoniem, a political commentator from Khartoum, who was living in the Sudanese capital when the conflict began. In Nairobi, Alan Boswell, the Horn of Africa director at the International Crisis Group. And in Cardiff, Elbashir Idris, an independent analyst and activist who monitors human rights violations in Sudan using open source intelligence. A warm welcome to you all. If I could start with Elbashir in Cardiff, what's behind the advances we've suddenly started seeing the Sudanese army making against the RSF lately?
Well, there's a number of factors involved here, but ever since the 26th of September 2024, when we've seen SAF's counter-offensive start, we've seen multiple campaigns and battles from different fronts done by the Sudanese armies, multiple battalions, militias, and brigades. Essentially, what we're seeing here is the result of an encirclement of Khartoum, of the capital city. And the reason why the capture of the Republican Palace is not only symbolically important, but strategically as well, is because it serves as a nexus point for the multiple brigades and battalions to meet within the capital city, within the Republican Palace and downtown Khartoum. This will then allow them to move south to clear out the RSF, to clear out Khartoum from the remaining RSF. So these developments...
Elbashir, are we seeing a pattern here of new weapons, new alliances on the side of the Sudanese army playing a major role in the advances they're making?
Well, ever since drone warfare has come into the scope of this war since its beginning, actually, it's really changed the dynamics of warfare in Sudan. Before, warfare would be more on tanks and use of high-speed Toyotas, but now with air assistance and superiority as well, especially with SAF side, it's managed to quench the RSF's ability to, or rather the rapid support forces, the airplanes coming in from China, or rather fighter jets, along with Iranian drones and Russian weaponry as well, has certainly emboldened the Sudanese armed forces to take a much more direct approach in its assault. And that's
right.
what we're seeing
going on. All right, Alan, is the RSF on the verge of losing control of the capital, Khartoum?
Yes, I think this is essentially, well, it's not the beginning of the end, because I think the beginning of the end happened a while ago, but the RSF essentially looks on the cusp of losing Khartoum. That's obviously a huge deal, because this is a war that started in Khartoum, and Khartoum has been the big prize of the war. And RSF, basically focused all of its fight on Khartoum for essentially the first 6 months of the war. Hemeti, the leader of the RSF, went on video recently imploring his troops not to give up Khartoum and saying they would defend the palace. So that it's almost impossible for the RSF to spin any of this as anything other than a pure loss.
Alan, is it down to one last bridge linking Khartoum with the West and the potential to cut off RSF troops in the capital?
Yes, RSF is rapidly losing positions. I'd say the main strategic asset left is that final remaining bridge they still hold south of Khartoum, which does connect their main home turf in Western Sudan and their main supply chains and the arms that they are able to give all come across that one remaining bridge. We're seeing offensive operations by the Sudanese army to try to cut that off, which could succeed sometime soon. At that point, if RSF hasn't already retreated, essentially the forces that are left would probably be besieged. It would probably be an ugly mop-up operation after that.
Dallia, in Cairo, so what's the bigger picture from all of what we've been discussing? Is this a major turning point in this almost 2-year-long war, or just another ebb and flow in the battles?
I think it's an ebb and flow, because the RSF still controls major areas in Sudan, not just in Khartoum. The focus has always been Khartoum for the army, but the rest of the country is pretty much divided. And like you rightly pointed out at the start of the show, the western region, Darfur, is pretty much 80-90% under the control of the RSF. Now, what happens over there, especially in light of the fact that the joint allied forces with SAF are made up from Darfuri groups and armies, what does that mean? I mean, the war, I think that will be the battle royale. Al-Fashir has been besieged for months now, and there's no sign of it being, loosening or letting up anytime soon. So I think it's a moral victory for the army, for the Sudanese army, and it's a moral defeat to the RSF. But like we've seen, there is precedence. Every time they lose an area, they engaged in these revenge attacks, and they their attacks on other areas by the RSF are more highlighted and they become more atrocious and horrific. So this is just
Dallia,
one.
It sounds like, could we still say it might be a turning point in the sense that the battle shifts westwards now?
The battle will shift westwards. Absolutely, it is a turning point because regaining the palace, the presidential palace, is huge. It was where the war actually initiated back in April 15th, 2023. So 2 years later, this is huge for SAF. But the RSF is also getting weaponry, advanced weaponry, just like SAF is. And so I don't think they will give up Khartoum easily unless they are roundly defeated. And already there have been reports today of fighting between both sides in several areas of Khartoum. And Khartoum is a huge city. It's not just central Khartoum, it's the peripheries and so on. And so, but for SAF, this is huge and it will give them momentum, undoubtedly. And what happens next, all I can do is we can wait and see. But I hold my breath, as in it's not going to be so easy as many perceive it to be.
Elbashir, do you think this will have an impact on any hope of a negotiated settlement?
Well, if you're the one winning the war, then you are in a better chance of setting the terms. When we've seen the beginning of this war, we saw that it was the RSF setting the terms a lot more, and SAF essentially refusing to sit on the negotiating table, or rather sparingly sitting on the negotiating table because the terms were not in its favor. Now the tables have flipped, and it seems that with SAF's multiple victories, though it comes at the back of a lot of sacrifices. I don't think SAF would want to sit down in a negotiation unless it can get a complete surrender, an unconditional surrender from the RSF, or with its benefactors, the UAE, to make sure that they don't send any more supplies and arms. But at this moment, though there are different camps, or rather factions within the belligerents, some within SAF that would rather sit down and have dialogue, I think those with the louder megaphone are calling for continued warfare and not to have negotiations. But that answer comes down to the Sudanese people, whether they believe that they can live side by side with the Janjaweed, with the RSF, or if they wish to completely go forward with this and see the eradication almost of the RSF.
I just want to point out for viewers, when we talk about the SAF, that's an acronym for the Sudanese Armed Forces. And so, Alan in Nairobi, as the discussion here takes us to the picture of maybe the RSF consolidating its position in the west and in the south, the advance of the army in Khartoum strengthening its position in the central parts of the country and the north, does that mean, is the country heading towards partition, as some fear?
There's already something of a de facto partition, but it's not a clean one. And I'm skeptical we're going to see anything like a durable stasis that is a partition, like, people point to the Libya example, for instance. That's because I don't think the Sudanese army can really afford to just leave the RSF alone in Darfur, continuing to receive supplies. The RSF has yet given any indication that it's interested in just holding the western half of Sudan. So you'd be risking essentially allowing the group to regroup, look for vulnerabilities to launch strikes. Dallia was right. This is a war that's had a lot of ebbs and flows. The RSF is not very good on the defensive, but they are pretty good, as their name suggests, basically at sort of lightning strikes. So you'd have a situation where you'd have a well-armed group in the western part of the country that, as its name suggests, can move very rapidly and could be probing the armor, so to speak. That doesn't sound like a very stable partition. There's no reason for RSF to quite be happy with that situation. I do think that's a potential situation in terms of if we do see this go to talks. That's not the only thing that could happen, but you could see not a formal partition, but a ceasefire almost result in something that allowed sort of different areas of control for a while. But I think while the war is going on, it will be difficult to see something so clean.
We've got to also keep in mind that there's a lot of displaced people suffering. They're facing famine. Dallia, do these latest army gains change the game, the lay of the land for aid groups which are trying to reach people in need?
It should, on paper, it should. The bureaucratic impediments that SAF has been placing on aid agencies should be naturally be lifted. However, the problem is now funding. A lot of these, community kitchens and EIRs are facing huge funding problems. And at the same time, the cleanup process. And when I say cleanup, every time an area has been recaptured from the RSF, what's been left behind, the atrocities they committed, it takes a while for them to, find the bodies, bury them, and so on. So it will take time. And the humanitarian situation is something that is very long term. And there's, like I said, funding is a huge problem. And at the same time, where is the incentive to actually help? Because the humanitarian aid has been weaponized by both sides in this conflict. And like all conflicts, is always the people who are the burden is placed on them, the civilians. And even if Khartoum sees some alleviation of the hardship that the people are suffering, if you look at Darfur, and especially what's happening in Zamzam displacement camp, for example, they're besieged. The United Nations has had to ration food supplies. Some people have to wait days to get 1 gallon of water. So the situation is horrible on the ground for the people. And military victories are all nice and everything, but the most vulnerable of Sudanese are the ones who need help, and the help is not coming to them. And I don't see how soon.
Will it help for those parts of Khartoum which we've been hearing warnings that they're approaching famine? Will the situation get better for them?
I mean, you're talking about there's inflation. There's also greed from traders and merchants who are hiking up the prices of, basic necessity goods, and at the same time, the supply chain. And there's no, income for people. So how can people afford to buy for these, to buy at the same time? The aid packages to get through, the aid convoys to get through, they face a lot of bureaucratic red tape. So there
Still a very difficult picture.
Yeah, there will be some immediate relief, but long term, you're talking about malnutrition. You're talking about famine, lack of food. It's a horrific and dire picture, and there's no rose.
Right.
There's no way to prettify it and say it's going to get better anytime soon.
Elbashir, the changing situation on the battlefield, what does it mean for the threat to people's personal safety that a lot of citizens have felt?
Well, as Dallia earlier put it, whenever we see a gain by either side, specifically more so a gain by SAF, by the Sudanese Armed Forces, we see revenge killings done within RSF-controlled territories, especially done on civilians. May that be done in frustration of their losses, or may that be done in the name of security, supposedly trying to catch collaborators, or may that be done in the name of humanitarian, essentially just robbing and looting whilst killing at the same time. And we've seen multiple reports of this ever since the SAF's counteroffensive started, really. And it's what makes these gains so almost bittersweet, very bittersweet. It's one side will be celebrating, but then immediately after, the news would come out of atrocities of killings within neighborhoods.
But Bashir, if the RSF now is trying to set up some kind of parallel administration, does that give it more of an incentive to address what many international human rights groups like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have been talking about? They've criticised all warring sides in this party, but there's been a particular focus of criticism on the RSF for engaging in what they call war crimes of killings, rapes, abductions and looting. Do they have more of an incentive to address that now if they're trying to present themselves as a parallel government?
Well, it's a bit too late for that after 2 years. Besides, the RSF, when it first started this war, or rather when the belligerents started, it said they would create a unit for civilian protection. We haven't seen that materialize once. I haven't seen no ID cards, no passports, no any semblance of a state institutions being formed by the RSF within RSF-controlled territories, other than SAHO, which is essentially the RSF's version of the Humanitarian Aid Commission, essentially the body that controls humanitarian aid. Now, for almost 2 years, we haven't seen a capable, effective, and equipped humanitarian agency within the RSF-controlled territories. So
Right.
for them to say now that they wish to create these bodies to investigate their crimes and atrocities, well, we have 2 years to look back into, and then we have another 20 years to look back into over the genocides they did in Darfur.
Before I come to Alan, actually, on this point, I want to briefly ask Dallia to share with us your experience, right? Because you lived in Khartoum when the conflict broke out. Tell us what you witnessed and what prompted people like you to decide, I've got to get out of here.
Well, our house was hit with a missile, so we were basically forced to leave. We had no choice. And the one image I will always remember is that of bodies on the street in front of our house and on the streets when we were trying to get out of our neighborhood. And when I left my house, we all thought that we'd be back within a week. It's been 2 years now, coming up to 2 years. And even if the war ends tomorrow, the level of destruction that my city, Khartoum, for example, has seen, I don't know when I'll be able to go back. And I can't even imagine how it's like in the rest of the country, which already was devastated and on its knees, in regards to services and, whether it's healthcare or schools or social services. And so I can't imagine how they're like now. So we all talk about going back and wanting to go back, but to go back to what and how, and are we able to, and how to, we all want to rebuild our country. We all want it to move forward, but the long lasting effects of this war is going to be generational, and it will take a long time for us to be able to come to grips with it and to come to the realization that something needs to be done. But every day, my hopes of going back are ebb. The chances of me going back anytime soon are just very low at this moment in time.
We do hope the situation improves so people like you can go home. Alan, if we broaden the picture to what's happening regionally and internationally behind the scenes, if we can use that phrase, are we seeing the Sudanese authorities, the Sudanese army, make something of a strategic pivot towards Russia, Iran and China? Something of a realignment is going on.
Yeah, I don't think I'd say it's a realignment per se. The Sudanese army has been looking where it can to get weapons. That includes Iran. They've been looking for weapons from Russia, from China, like you say. The other factor here is at the moment, the U.S. has basically exited the picture as well. There has been these long-running negotiations between Russia and Sudan, now under the Sudanese army, about a potential, what they're calling a logistics base for a naval logistics base on the Red Sea. But it's unclear how serious those talks are, or if those are primarily just something that are dangled out there, essentially to try to scare the West and scare other people.
Well, there is talk of a Russian naval base being set up on the Red Sea coast. Elbashir on the other side. Is it clear what the West's position is? Is it is it withdrawing from the picture, or has it indirectly sided with the RSF in some senses by declining the Sudanese government's demands to pressure the UAE over its support for the RSF? I do know, of course, we should remind viewers that the outgoing US administration including the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. I think he accused the RSF genocide in January, in the last days of the Biden administration. But by, the sort of posture which Alan was describing, something of a withdrawal, is it going to be seen as something of an indirect positioning of itself of if not support, but indifference to the demands to clamp down on RSF?
Well, the West's indifference to the conflict in Sudan has certainly made a lot of people feel that the West has been complicit in the war in Sudan, especially providing some sort of diplomatic cover for the Rapid Support Forces vis-a-vis with the UAE. And the UAE essentially tells the West that we need protection within the UN, or we may need protection for an upcoming International Court of Justice lawsuit that was filed by Sudan towards the UAE. There's many who feel that as well, that the West really needs to look within itself first when it comes into the matters of international law and see how it's been treating other nations within the region and see whether it holds up to those standards, because it seems to be there are double standards at play here. Things that would have been passed in Ukraine seem to be not materializing within the Sudan file. And as we've seen with the international order, ever since President Trump has come into office, essentially the international order and community and even diplomacy has become toothless, as there's a new world order, you can say, and Sudan's position within that, it's a very fickle one, as you said earlier, and you said to Alan, Sudan isn't realigning itself with these countries. It's always been part of a block of these countries, and as things seem to be changing in the pecking order, in international pecking order, Sudan used to be at the bottom, but now it wishes to find another place.
Okay, I think we've got about 30 seconds left. Very brief question to Alan then. Al-Fashir, is it the next hotspot to keep your eye on? Will it decide whether that this is simply a phase of consolidation or the beginning of the end for the RSF?
Yes, Al-Fashir. I think the really big thing to keep an eye on is what the external backers, though, do. Will the UAE pivot towards trying to repair its relations with Port Sudan and allow this war to de-escalate? Will Egypt and Saudi Arabia pressure the Sudanese army to use this as an opportunity towards pivoting towards peace as well? I think these external players in this war are the ones who, if we're going to see this war wrap up, will need to make some pivots.
All right, thanks so much to our guests for sharing their analysis, Dallia Abdelmoniem, Alan Boswell and Elbashir Idris. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami, Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.